In the space of a single generation, one country did something almost no nation in history has ever managed. It cut its birth rate in half, and then in half again, faster than any country had ever done before. There was no famine, no disaster, no force, just a plan. And for a while, the world called it a miracle. That country was Iran. And here is the part almost nobody expects. This was not a secular Western government with a health ministry full of liberal reformers. This was the Islamic Republic, a state built on religion, born out of revolution, running one of the boldest and most effective family planning programs the world had ever seen. Free contraception for anyone who wanted it. Compulsory classes for every couple before they could marry. Clinics reaching into the most remote mountain villages in the country, and one of the largest condom factories in the entire region. For more than 20 years, it worked. It worked better than anyone had dared to hope. And then the country that built it tore it down. The same leaders who had once called it a triumph now called it a mistake. Funding was cut, posters came down, laws were rewritten, and almost everything that had made Iran a global model was quietly dismantled. This is the story of how Iran won the war against overpopulation and then decided it had won too well. To understand how this happened, how a deeply religious state became a world leader in birth control and then walked away from it, we have to go back to three things: a revolution, a brutal 8-year war, and a decision that would shape the lives of tens of millions of people who never got to vote on it. This is not a story about taking sides. It's a story about numbers and about what happens when a country tries to steer its own future, succeeds beyond all expectation, and then panics at what it has done. So let's go back to the beginning, back to 1979. In 1979, Iran was transformed. A revolution swept away the monarchy, and in its place rose the Islamic Republic, led by Ayatollah Khomeini. In those first years, the mood of the new state was clear. Families should grow. The family planning programs of the old regime were viewed with suspicion, foreign, elitist, a project of the Shah's government, and they were pushed aside. Early marriage was encouraged. Contraception faded from public life. And there was a logic to it. A large, young population was seen as a strength. More soldiers, more workers, more believers for a new nation that felt, at that moment, surrounded by enemies. Then, in 1980, the enemy arrived. Iraq invaded, and Iran was plunged into 8 brutal years of fighting, one of the longest and bloodiest wars of the 20th century. Hundreds of thousands of people died. An entire generation of young men was sent to the front. And in a country at war, more children did not feel like a burden. More children felt like survival, like replacement, like defiance. So the birth rate soared. At its peak, the average Iranian woman was having more than 6 children. The population was growing at close to 4% a year, one of the fastest growth rates anywhere on the planet. Now, a population growing at 4% a year doubles in under 20 years. Think about what that means. Every school, every hospital, every apartment, every job, every liter of water doubled in less than 2 decades just to stand still. When the war finally ended in 1988, Iran's leaders sat down and looked at the numbers, and they saw something coming toward them that no army could stop. The war had left the country exhausted. Cities were damaged, the economy was battered, oil revenues were down, inflation was up, and the state was trying to rebuild everything at once. And into that shattered economy, millions of children were arriving every year. Schools were running double and triple shifts because there was no space. Classrooms held 60, 70 students. Within a decade, all of those children would be teenagers. Within 15 years, they would need jobs, homes, and food on a scale the country simply could not deliver. Iran's leaders faced a hard truth. The population growth they themselves had encouraged during the war was now the single greatest threat to the nation's future. And so, around 1989, the government made a remarkable turn. It decided to do something that many people assumed a religious state would never do. It relaunched a national family planning program, and this time it would go further than almost any country on earth. But to make it work, clinics and contraception would not be enough. In a society where faith shaped daily life, they needed something more powerful. They needed religion itself on their side. This is the part of Iran's story that makes it so extraordinary. In much of the world, organized religion had stood against contraception. In Iran, the religious leadership did the opposite. Senior clerics and, crucially, Ayatollah Khomeini himself issued religious rulings, fatwas, holding that contraception was permitted under Islam. Their reasoning was not that faith should bend to the state. It was that family planning was not, in itself, against faith at all. Protecting the health of mothers, the well-being of families, and the future of the community was entirely in keeping with religious duty. That single step unlocked everything, because now the message was not coming only from government officials on television. It came from the mosque. It came from the pulpit. Imams spoke about it in sermons. It was taught in community meetings as compatible with belief, not opposed to it. And in a society where religion touched nearly every part of daily life, that changed the entire conversation. A family who might have ignored a government poster would listen to their local cleric. Iran had done something almost unheard of anywhere in the world. It had made birth control a religiously endorsed act. With religion, government, and the health ministry all pushing in the same direction, Iran built a system that demographers still study today. At its heart was a simple, brilliant idea: reach everyone, not just the cities, everyone. Because Iran's fastest population growth was not in Tehran. It was in the villages, in the mountains, in places where a government campaign would normally never arrive. So Iran built thousands of small rural clinics, known as health houses. Each one served a cluster of villages. Each one was staffed by health workers, recruited from those very communities, people who spoke the local dialect, knew every family, and would still be there in 10 years. And they did not simply hand out contraception and leave. They sat with families. They talked about maternal health, about spacing births, about how a mother's body recovers. They explained the options and let people choose. And everything was free. The program went further than almost any other on Earth. Pills, condoms, IUDs, sterilization for both men and women, all provided at no cost. Iran built one of the largest condom factories in the region, so it would never depend on imports. And then came a step almost no other country has ever taken. Family planning education became mandatory. Before a couple could legally marry, both partners had to attend a class covering contraception, family health, and the responsibilities of raising children. Think about the reach of that. Not a voluntary leaflet, not an advert. Every single couple in the country, before marriage, in a classroom. 2 children became the new national ideal, promoted on posters, on television, in the speeches of officials, and in the words of clerics. And one slogan came to capture the whole campaign: 2 children are enough. The results were staggering. In the early 1980s, the average Iranian woman had more than 6 children. Within roughly 15 years, that number had fallen to around 2, and in some cities, lower still. To put that in perspective, it took most European countries a century or more to make that same journey. Iran did it in a decade and a half. It was one of the fastest sustained declines in fertility ever recorded anywhere on Earth. And Iran did it without coercion. There were no forced sterilizations, no birth quotas, no penalties for large families. It was done through education, access, and consent, which is precisely what made it so remarkable to the outside world. The world took notice. International organizations praised the program. In 1999, the United Nations recognized Iran's family planning effort with a population award. Public health experts flew in from around the globe to study the health house system and take it home. For a brief period, Iran was not a cautionary tale. It was the model, living proof that a country could bring runaway population growth under control, quickly, humanely, and with religion standing beside it rather than against it. And then, everything changed. By the 2000s, Iran's fertility rate had not just fallen, it had fallen through the floor. It dropped below replacement level, the rate at which a population sustains itself. Leaders looked at the projections and saw a completely new fear staring back. Not a nation overwhelmed by too many young people, but a nation with too few, an aging population, a shrinking workforce, fewer taxpayers supporting more pensioners, a country slowly getting older and smaller. And in 2012, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, delivered a stunning verdict. The family planning program, he said, had been a mistake. It was a total reversal. The state that had spent 2 decades urging families to have fewer children now urged them to have more. Budgets for family planning were slashed. The public messaging flipped completely. The same channels, the same billboards, the opposite message. Where the slogan had once been, 2 children are enough, the new call was for a young and growing nation once again. It stands as one of the most dramatic policy U-turns in modern history. A country that had built the world's most admired birth control program and then dismantled the very thing that had made it famous. The reversal did not stop at messaging. In 2021, Iran passed a sweeping new population law explicitly designed to raise the birth rate. It restricted access to some forms of contraception in the public health system and limited procedures such as vasectomies. It offered incentives, loans, land, benefits to couples who had more children. 20 years after leading the world in one direction, the country was now pulling hard in the opposite one. But here is the twist that history keeps repeating. Once a society gets used to smaller families, it is extraordinarily difficult to reverse, because the decision to have fewer children is not really about contraception at all. It's about the cost of housing. It's about educated women with careers. It's about young couples marrying later, in cities, with rent to pay. Look around the world. From Europe to East Asia, governments have poured enormous sums into raising birth rates. Cash bonuses, tax breaks, free childcare, national campaigns. And again, the needle has barely moved. Iran had learned how to bring a birth rate down. Bringing it back up would turn out to be a completely different and far harder problem. So what do we take from all of this? Iran's experiment is one of the clearest lessons in modern demography, and it cuts 2 ways. It proved that a country genuinely can change its own future, that with education, access, and the right message delivered by voices people actually trust, a birth rate can fall faster than almost anyone thought possible, even in a deeply religious society. That is an enormous finding, and it is still studied today by countries facing the same pressures Iran faced in 1988. But it also proved something humbler. Populations are not machines. You cannot simply set them to the level you want. You can slow them down. Speeding them back up is another matter entirely, because you are no longer changing a policy, you are trying to change what millions of people want for their own lives. Iran ran the most successful birth control program the world had ever seen, and then it quit. Whether that was wisdom or a mistake, the world is still watching to find out. If you found this story as surprising as we did, subscribe. History is full of experiments like this one, hiding in plain sight. And tell us in the comments, was Iran right to end it? Thanks for watching.